Candidates roll out, about a dozen of them on the Republican side. We could still have more. One man who opted not to join the party joins us right now, Mike Pompeo, of course, the former Secretary of State, former CIA director, Fox News contributor, much more. Secretary, always great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be with you.
Same here. Sir, I want to go back a little bit to something Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said. He echoes a sentiment that's kind of come out of Ron DeSantis when he called what was going on in Ukraine a border dispute. He's dialed that back somewhat. Donald Trump, of course, has famously said that he could end this in a day if he becomes president again. But there does seem to be an appetite among some of the candidates, not all, who want to dial it back with these engagements and in Ukraine. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. echoing that himself, that he thinks that this is something that they're not being up and up about us to us. What do you say?
Yeah, I think Americans have an important interest in making sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't expand his control in Europe, Neil. It'd be bad for folks in Arizona, it'd be bad for folks in Iowa and New Hampshire if Vladimir Putin were controlled not only in Kiev, but think of other European capitals as well. Something we've always known. We've known the Chinese Communist Party is watching to see how the West and the United States responds to an aggressive threat where the Ukrainians have now lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of their own people. This is a place where Zelensky has simply asked for the United States to provide him the tools so that they can fight and defend their own sovereignty. We ought to continue to do that. I regret only this. We've been too slow. We've been too scared. We've been too tepid. Had we done more sooner, I'm confident this would have either not happened, we would have kept the deterrence that the Trump administration had for 4 years, or in the event it broke out, we would have been able to bring this to a conclusion in a way that vindicated the fundamental rights of every citizen around the world in a way that doesn't reward this kind of aggressive action by Vladimir Putin.
Your former boss, Donald Trump, said he can end this in a day. I'm paraphrasing. I hope I have it right. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I have no idea what he's talking about. I wish it were so. In the end, Vladimir Putin gets a choice here, right? Vladimir Putin has made this decision. I heard Mr. Kennedy say that this was a provocation. I think that's a silly argument. Vladimir Putin has wanted to re-extend the Russian Empire since he was a young KGB agent, Neil. He has been intent on doing it. He saw American weakness. He saw us bail in Afghanistan, resulting in 13 Americans who were killed. He saw that and he said, this is my window to go be aggressive. I think this is the right thing for us to do, to respond in a way that vindicates this idea of every nation having the capacity to protect its own sovereignty. It's pretty straightforward. Vladimir Putin will find a day, if we do this well, where he'll throw in the towel. He'll realize that he needs to sue for peace. I haven't seen any evidence that it's that day. I hope that 24 hours from now that will happen, and I hope whoever the next president is can bring this to a conclusion quickly. I've simply seen no evidence that we're at that point yet.
You know, Secretary, the White House has officially said the story isn't true, but the story making the rounds that China has reached a deal with Cuba to establish, I guess, an electronic eavesdropping facility on the island of Cuba. Now, the details are sketch, and a lot of people who look at this are saying there's nothing to it, but of course it does harken back to what the then Soviet Union did in Cuba. We darn near came to World War III then. What do you think, if there is some traction to this, because there's no outright denial coming from the Chinese, for that matter, or the Cubans, what do you think we should do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've seen the reporting. I don't know how much validity there is to it. But I do know this, the Chinese Communist Party continues to expand its capabilities, its footprint around the world, and the United States and our friends and allies in the Pacific and in Europe are going to have to push back against the threat to protect the American people. In the end, it's about putting America first and getting it right. If they have, in fact, cut a deal with the Cubans, it wouldn't be terribly different from what they have done down in Argentina, where they're beginning to expand their signals capability, their capacity to collect against American movements and information flow. We should make sure that we explain to the Cubans that is simply unacceptable to be 90 miles off our shore and permitting another foreign nation to establish a major signals facility that close to us. us. We have the ability to do it. Sadly, the Biden administration has fallen down the same rat hole that the Obama administration did, a misunderstanding about how to handle Cuba. The Cuban people deserve better than the current regime. Instead, we've given them money and wealth. Now it looks like the Cubans have decided to side with the Chinese in spite of that. We ought to make sure that the regime in Cuba understands this is simply unacceptable to us.
Do you look at the presidential field, the Republican field, and have any favorites right now?
Neil, I have one favorite. It's the fact that I'm not in a race right now.
Would you support?
It's going to be great to watch.
Would you support any one of them? Should he or she become the nominee?
Yeah, absolutely. The choices are going to be pretty clear between our nominee and the Democrat Party's nominee. I think our nominee will be the one that's the best for American people, no matter which of these candidates moves forward.
Would it matter to you now with this growing rumor mongering that we're going to see a possible indictment of the former president when it comes to these classified documents? Details are sketchy. It might not happen, but certainly a lot of the pieces are coming together for that. That would be yet another problem for him to deal with on the campaign trail. And there are still other investigations going on considering his role, to try to redo the 2020 presidential election. Others talking about what he did in Georgia to try to influence a turn in that vote. There are some increasing cases here. Does that worry you?
I want to make sure we win this election. So anything that creates increased risk that the Republican Party won't be successful, that the conservative values, the ideas that I hold dear, won't be the ones that are sitting in the White House, absolutely concerns me. The American people will sort through this. I'm very confident of that, Neil. They'll find their path forward. And I've said this before with respect to the classified documents. Every one of us who ever served, I had thousands of classified documents in my possession over the 4 years in the executive branch and in Congress. We have a responsibility to handle them appropriately. And those of us who don't ought to be held accountable for that, no matter which party they're from. Biden's stuff in his garage next to his Corvette, or the documents that appear to have been down at Mar-a-Lago. When you make a mistake, you need to own it, Neil. And I hope that everyone who takes this sacred duty of protecting this information will do that.
Chris Christie has said that the difference between the two presidents on documents is that in Donald Trump's case, these were self-inflicted wounds. And he keeps having these self-inflicted wounds. I'm paraphrasing again. Asa Hutchinson has said just the allegations and the stuff that keeps coming out is reason enough for the president, fairly or not, to a lot of his backers to step out of the race, precisely because of the reasons you outlined. It could make him damaged goods on the campaign trail or running for president again if he were your nominee. Do you agree with some of that sentiment?
Well, I said, look, it creates some risk, but the American people are pretty sophisticated about sorting this all out, Neil. I've watched this over the years as I ran for office a handful of times. They kind of get it. They get which pieces are political. They get which pieces are real, and they understand the things that matter to them. I think they'll sort through this as well. As this proceeds over the coming months, we'll have lots of puts and takes. We've got lots of candidates. I hope what we'll do is we'll put an optimistic vision of how to get America moving forward, and when candidates do that, I am convinced they will be rewarded for that politically, and they'll be rewarded for that because they'll have done the right thing for the country as well.
Any teeny bit of angst that you opted not to join this race when you look at these guys, hear these guys, and say, man, I could do that?
Every now and again, Neil. But in the end, Susan and I made the decision that was right for us. It wasn't our moment. There's a long way to go in our lives. My service to America is something that I've been so privileged to do. Hopefully one day I'll get a chance to do that again. This just isn't the right time.
All right. We'll watch closely. Mike Pompeo, always a pleasure. Thank you.